Thank you everybody for the opportunity for us to have this discussion this afternoon. Welcome, Bill. So I think we want to start with a little bit of context here, and I want to talk about, just very briefly, why I'm so passionate about this, why I'm so passionate about water. For two reasons. First of all, I'm the Chief Executive of a growing city in the middle of a prosperous region. I'm very aware of my responsibilities as Chief Executive to ensure the safe and clean drinking water for our residents, for our visitors alike, and also for the disposal of our wastewater and our care of our stormwater networks, to ensure that we do so in an environmentally safe way and in a way that is cost effective and able to meet those expectations by the ratepayer. And I have to say, I have not met yet a chief executive of a territorial authority that does not take those responsibilities seriously. And also from a personal perspective, I'm extremely passionate about water because I was a resident in Havelock North in 2016. And two of my three children, my two daughters, were at school in Havelock North. And they contracted Campylobacter, along with over 5,000 other people of all ages and stages in life in that what they call the village. And that was a result of fecal matter that got into the Brookvale bore that contaminated the water that supplies the drinking water to Havelock North. 45 people were hospitalised, and unfortunately 4 people died at that time. But many of those that were infected and suffered are still suffering the side effects to this day. And some of those illnesses are Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is an autoimmune disease, reactive arthritis, and lactose intolerance. To put that in some sort of perspective, if we were to take that in an Auckland context, over 500,000 people would have been infected. Something like 4,900 people would have been hospitalised, and 430 people would have died. Those are extremely sobering statistics. In August 2017, the inquiry into the Havelock North crisis made 51 recommendations. And one of the 3 most significant of that was the establishment of a water regulator. So the Minister has spoken to us this afternoon about Taumata Arowai being a real-world modern regulator that ensures New Zealand receives safe, acceptable drinking water and helps prevent adverse events such as Havelock North from occurring again. So Bill, welcome. Can you please explain to us what Taumata Arowai is and what it will do?
I think the Minister and Peter Reedy have done it perfectly. It is a recognition arising from Havelock North and the recommendations of the inquiry that New Zealand needed a new approach to water regulation, and therefore it is an independent Crown entity with responsibility for direct regulation of drinking water and, if you like, a national overview over the regulation and performance of wastewater and stormwater.
Right. So you've had your feet under the desk for a wee while now. Well, not that long, but a bit of time. What do you see as the key challenges of the next, say, between 12 months and sort of 5 years?
In the next 12 months, it's the kind of construction of an organisation and providing everybody who is a water supplier and a wastewater and stormwater operator with a clear signal of what is expected of them and of us. Yep. That's the major challenge, and if you think that we have a go-live date at the moment, sort of as a target of 1 July, it's not far to go. I'd also stress that if you've read the Water Services Bill, you'll be aware that it is a very different approach. It is a collaborative, real-world regulator approach where people who take on responsibility for supplying drinking water to New Zealand communities take on a very strong duty of care. And so it is about working hand in hand with the sector and literally lifting all of our performance.
So can you explain the requirements and timeframes for the registration of water schemes?
I can do it easily in terms of the 500 plus people. Simply that anybody who has been registered before will be continued to be registered, and that we will be working very closely with them over the first year as they look to revise their drinking water safety plans. However, this is an ideal opportunity for me to stress that the Water Services Bill is exactly that. Our champion, the Ngāia Mahuta, managed to get that introduced to the House on the very last day of Parliament. Pretty phenomenal achievement. And as she said, she's going to get it onto the order paper, and we hope that it'll receive its first reading and go to Select Committee before Christmas. That means that there's nothing definitive in the Water Services Bill. There is an opportunity, and certainly we are exploring at the moment within ourselves and with local government in particular, and iwi Māori, basically how we might handle small suppliers and how we might be that real world regulator.
Yes, so just speaking of small suppliers there, the expectations that are going to be on them. So we're thinking about those smaller water schemes that might just be a country road where there's several farms on it, or how that might work. The
definition in the Water Services Bill at the moment is pretty much anything greater than a house. If you're supplying water to someone else, you're a water supplier. And we have to take that into account, which is why the Water Services Bill allows us to have a fit-for-purpose regulatory strategy, which recognises that Auckland's fundamentally different from Kaikoura, and that a group of batches on the banks of an estuary are very, very different, for instance, from a single farm that's supplying a honey operation, a pack house, and maybe a sort of B&B.
So at the moment, there's a number of conversations that are happening around water. How are you integrating, I guess, your thinking and the conversations that are happening, particularly around productive water irrigation and the concurrent freshwater regulations and how that's seen?
We are only a small part of water reform, and I think the Minister stressed that. So we know that what's coming across New Zealand water sort of business is why is why. And Te Mana o Te Wai is therefore governing all that we do. And so we're having to watch very carefully how this next phase of the RMA rolls out in terms of the MPS for freshwater, and where indeed the Randerson review that speakers have referred to earlier take us. We're also, of course, the Water Services Bill and the formation of Taumata Arowai predated COVID and predated the initiative for Three Waters reform, for the service reform. And the Minister talked about three pillars. The first one being the formation of Taumata Arowai, the second one being the if you like, the Water Services Bill, which is our duty and functions, and the third one, which is the service delivery reform. So basically we're keeping a close eye on all those, and I suggest that how some of those travel will affect us.
Yeah, and I'd like to come back and talk a little bit about Three Waters reform, but before I do that, the Minister also talked about being Te Matua Arowai being guided by a Māori advisory group. So how can you advise iwi to be involved in the shaping of Te Matua Arowai, and how is that working at the moment?
I think it's the other way around. I think with engagement that we're undertaking at the moment, iwi are advising us as to how they expect to be involved. We've just finished 20 hui around the nation and learnt a lot, and certainly read our pedigree in terms of New Zealand's performance in drinking water and wastewater, most of it highly accurate. And so I look forward to working with them. Our Māori advisory group and Māori board, and the board have just called for expressions of interest. And so that board and the Māori advisory group should be live, if you like, end of February, mid-February, and that's when we can operate with them and get them to give us the guidance that what we have built into our organisation's tikanga, mataranga, is okay.
Yeah. So let's come back to the Three Waters reform. You're involved in that. You and I both sit on the steering group as part of that conversation around that. Can we talk a little bit about the regulator and how do you see that water reform playing out and your role within that?
I think one of the things you have to recognise is that I sit on the Three Waters steering committee really firstly as a matter of joy. When I took on the task of being the establishment CEO, it wasn't hard to work out that to work and lift the performance of New Zealand's drinking water in particular required a significant change in the way we were doing things and a significant investment in terms of infrastructure. And I guess that the point being made that if you're going to do that with 67 units of local government, that's going to be quite a huge ask. And so therefore it is, as many other speakers have said at this conference so far, time to look at the status quo won't work, what will work, and therefore the Three Waters reform, the service delivery reform, is a marvellous collaboration between local government and central government to say, we have a problem, how are we going to fix that? I am very biased as to its outcome. The thought of being a regulator controlling 67 units of local government versus a regulator working with somewhere between 2 and 8 major multi-regional entities, I'll take the 2 to 8 anytime.
Yes. So your insight into the opportunity around reform to unlock and enable a significant catch-up. We've talked about, and the Minister talked about as well, about the I guess, years of underinvestment in infrastructure and Three Waters investment. I think we're talking about something like $30 billion. I can only talk from my own experience of our wastewater consent is coming up soon in 2028, and just looking at the costs of the alternatives to treat wastewater for 91,000 people is anything between 300 million and 800 or 900 million. So do the math on that. It's an expensive outcome. So can you talk a little bit more about how you see that?
I guess I'll reverse the insight to start with. And from what I know, and only 6 months ago, I was CEO of a regional council dealing with 10 territorial authorities across Canterbury, all of whom had their challenges. All of them had similar stories to yours. And I guess for me is, if we don't change the status quo, if we don't take this opportunity that is presented, you have to think about where that might place us. And that might place this incredible country that I'm very proud of in terms of what we've done in terms of COVID-19, and put it on its head when a whole lot of people question tourism, food export, and even basic health. How come we've managed COVID so superbly, and yet, as Peter outlined, 34,000 people drink unregulated drinking water every year and get sick?
Sobering statistics.
They are.
Another thing that has been identified through this process has been lifting capability, drive to strategic procurement, enabling improvement in data capture and systems. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I would. Many of the smaller councils in the Three Waters Review have flagged the fact that their capability is not high. They have to access systems that they're not familiar with. And that's not in any way to criticise the people in this room that try to assist them, but it is tough. And I guess for me is, the larger entities should allow a growth in capability. They should allow a growth in industry. This is going to be a growth area. If we look at the Three Waters service delivery coming off, then we're looking at a substantial increase in the people who are involved in drinking water, wastewater and stormwater. Stormwater might take a while, but this is going to be a growth industry for certainly the next decade and possibly the decade after.
I would agree with you. On reflection, we've only got a few minutes, and so we will have to wrap up. But
we can't keep these people from their cocktails.
We cannot. We are. It's between us and the drinks out the back, nearly. But before we do, if I was to talk to you in 5 years' time and reflect on the establishment of Taumata Arowai, you've talked about some of the challenges. What would be the success? What would you be talking about as we've in that 5 years, we've had some key successes? What would they be?
In 5 years, I guess for Taumata Arowai, it would be that we had programs clearly set out and established, and a regulatory strategy for how to get there across all three waters, So that would mean drinking water, wastewater and stormwater, all addressed in 5 years. I suspect that to work out the relationships with stormwater and who's going to, if you like, be accountable for what, might well take a few years to kick that off. I'd also like to think that Taumata Arowai was a relatively lean and mean organisation with an army of authorised persons out there in a self-supporting sector that were really looking after themselves. And I guess for me is in 5 years, I hope that there is somewhere between 2 and 8 multi-regional entities that are in 5 years delivering all 3 waters, but certainly drinking water and wastewater, and that they have really changed the face of kind of the priorities and the investment that's going in. I love the idea of an infrastructure pipeline because that's really what we're after. There isn't a part of New Zealand that doesn't need significant upgrades, significant overhauls.
Bill, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time this afternoon. You're sticking around for this evening and be available to talk with people who want to have a broader conversation with you about the challenges ahead.
Happy to.
Thank you very much.